Could you share your perspective about the unique characteristics of this region from an investor's perspective?
Sure. I mean, this region is geopolitically and geographically very important as it is expanding from Turkey in the east to Pakistan in the west, Kazakhstan in the north, the GCC, Oman and Yemen in the south. So we are talking about 740 million people, and what is characterizing it because of its geopolitical importance for global trade and investments and flows, it actually is challenged and has had recurring conflicts, which mean 460 million of the 740 million population live in a country that is either classified as IDA by the World Bank, which means low income, or fragile and conflict-affected situation. So in this context, the question is, how do we deliver our mandate of eliminating poverty on a livable planet? And what characterizes this region is that it's very diverse. So when you work with local private sector and with regional private sector, you can already resolve a lot of the issues since you have a great complementarity in these geographically close by countries, from high income countries to low income and fragile countries.
Linked to these characteristics, I think, is our priority and focus areas. Can you share IFC's priorities and investment focus areas in this region for the viewers of this conference?
Definitely. So when we looked at what could be moving the needle towards achieving for these 740 million people a world free of poverty on a livable planet, which is our revised statement of the World Bank mission, which we are the arm of the bank that works with the private sector. We identified when we brainstormed together that 3 priority areas. Number 1, what it is about climate change and biodiversity preservation, acting on climate change and preserving biodiversity. In this region of the world, you can address both mitigation and adaptation. This region of the world is going to be one of those that are most severely warming, most water stressed, and therefore most food deprived. So you can do a lot in terms of using the most advanced smart technologies for water security, food security, and investments that preserve natural resources. At the same time, we can help on mitigation because this region has economies that are too dependent on oil and gas exports and production. So they are striving to diversify their economies, and we can help on that. Diversify, like it was recently decided in COP28, have energy systems that move away from fossil fuels and also removing emissions of methane. These two our region can help with, since we have yet to develop solutions that are zero carbon, like the surface geothermal for heating and cooling, etc. So that's number 1. Number 2 is this is a relatively young population and growing. So the ability to have policies and investments that are job generating, that give quality jobs for this bulging youth is absolutely essential. That's the main direct line to alleviating poverty and giving stability, because without jobs, people become unrestless. And last but not least, of course, for both of us, is gender empowerment and inclusive provision of finance. Of course, there is a lot of opportunity for the women and girls of this region to be better empowered, using a variety of solutions to handle their lack of mobility due to lack of solutions for childcare, elderly care, safe transport, and access to financial resources and to ownership of assets. And we work very closely on that.
I would maybe add one more thing, if I may. Trade finance, I think, is quite essential, both for job creation and generating the export and import flows within the region and across the region.
Yes, 1 in every $4 that IFC invests indeed is related to facilitating trade. And this became crucial when COVID hit and then the global inflation hit on essential goods and food and energy. That's how in volatile economies like Turkey and Pakistan, IFC played a key role in providing those risk sharing to the local banks so that they can get access to export and import confirmation from foreign banks.
Yes, I think we can speak hours about what IFC is doing in these teams and focus areas. We do a lot of investments, but we know it's never enough because the development gaps and needs in private sector is huge. Can you share how IFC is catalyzing private sector investments, how we are mobilizing private sector to empower private sector and make them grow?
Sure. So one of the characteristics that one can say with some differences characterizes this region is there is still a relative high dominance by the state. State-owned enterprises in the majority of these countries are the greatest contributor to the GDP. And that is not the optimal way of doing things, especially in a context where contingent liabilities and direct liabilities to the sovereign are hitting limits. So this is where IFC and the broader World Bank group institutions are always there to bring lessons learned globally to how we could monetize these state-owned assets and attract qualified regional, local and international private sector that have both the deep pockets and the knowledge. And what is interesting is that in many instances, Turkish or GCC companies could be some of those who have the most appetite for some of the geographies we cover, which may not be appealing to Western companies. That's one of the ways is to advise the government about how to achieve that balance between making sure the people have access to quality, affordable services, while not expecting the government to deliver everything, but rather rely more and more on private sector. In addition to monetizing existing state-owned assets, another way is for new needs, do it through public-private partnerships. And we provide advisory and we mobilize finance. That's how we did the first competitively tendered and therefore most cost-effective first ever independent power producer for solar and for wind in Uzbekistan. And that was followed by the rest of the region of Central Asia, where they saw that actually doing it that way allows to have cost-effective and efficient and quickly delivered energy. The other way that we catalyze is the fact that IFC is one of the development finance institutions that has the most established capacity for originate to distribute, what we call the model of mobilization. We have on average mobilized in private capital mobilization definition $2 for each dollar we invest, which is a broader definition than our core mobilization. And we aim to do a lot more. But how are we doing it? Through syndication of commercial banks, through bringing parallel financing from international development finance institutions, and through being a fund of funds, especially in areas like venture equity, which is very scarce in our region, private equity, and of course equity is a very catalytic financial instrument. Finally, IFC, as the one that is really present in every country, works closely with MIGA, the most effective source of political risk insurance, and we help investors get that coverage against risks they cannot manage through the MIGA insurance products.
And when I was at HBS, we were quite interested in private equity, venture capital, and startups. There are many entrepreneurs already among the participants, I'm sure. For them, IFC also invests in disruptive tech, fintech, startups, investments as well. I think this is another way that we are catalyzing investments in private sector. Let's move to the challenges and opportunities, right, in this region. This region is kind of branded as a region of crisis, region of conflict. But we want to see it as the opportunity, right? And to create those opportunities, we are navigating risks as IFC. And we are doing it also for our investors, right? To decrease the risks in the investments that we are going into with co-investors or with private companies. Can you elaborate a bit on how we navigate these risks in this region? What are the strategies we employ?
Yes. True, this region, because of its strategic importance for global trade and for global access to natural resources that are essential for the survival of the human species, has been seeing fragility and conflict as part of the geopolitical agenda. So we can help the countries make the best use of their strategic assets. For instance, as you know, the world does not have enough of the critical minerals and metals to actually move to a zero carbon energy system. The whole proven and even established global reserves in some of the minerals and metals would have to be very quickly developed and beyond if we are to achieve that energy system that moves away from fossil fuels. And some of these essential underdeveloped resources are in this region. For instance, in Pakistan, there is an estimated $6 billion that needs to happen in the Reko Diq copper and gold mine. That copper is one of the critical metals if we want to digitize the economies and have digital instruments or products, and if we want to have zero carbon renewable energy. So IFC is working with this JV between a private investor and the government of Pakistan to mobilize private and blended finance. So when we talk about the need for blended finance in providing the appealing risk reward for private investments in the region, what we mean by this is that sometimes to be able to attract local or regional or international private sector, the proposed investment requires either a first loss, someone who absorbs this perception, sometimes real, sometimes over-perceived of risks, or to fill a viability gap. So for instance, when we are dealing with climate change mitigation, a big obstacle is that price of carbon has not been established at the right level globally. Therefore, if you want to move to a lower emission trajectory, you need to have that viability gap filler, which can be done either by blended finance or by tax incentives. When the country is poor, they cannot give so many tax incentives like the US, for instance, did in the Inflation Reduction Act. So we need to come in and help with these donor money, taxpayers' money to be used in a very catalytic, because it is scarce kind of money. So blended finance, developing strategic resources that will serve the world, and trying to become part of the global supply chain, create local value add. Instead of extracting raw materials and exporting it as such, develop the local manufacturing, because extractive industry may not offer as many employment opportunities as local manufacturing and services. So how to maximize the value add that is created locally. And of course, if you look at Pakistan, Turkey, Jordan, and many other countries in this region, they do have the human capital, which sometimes requires upskilling, reskilling, so that they can fully capitalize and become much bigger exporters, part of the global supply chains.
I think related to this, what are the key risks that you see the investors and the private sector companies are facing in this region? And how do you think they can mitigate these risks?
So Ajay Banga, the president of World Bank Group, has established a private sector investment lab, which is 15 global CEOs, to ask them, what is the perceived risk of working in emerging market developing economy? And the same applies to my region of Middle East, Central Asia, Turkey, Afghanistan, Pakistan. And they put these in three big buckets. One is the regulatory risk, the political risk, which is the most effective way of de-risking is first to say, these are the rules of the game, and I assure you that we will abide by them through the life of these long-term investments. So that talks to legal, regulatory, institutional setup, clarity of governance, reliability of the judicial system. All of these intangible but essential, and also clarity of the strategic direction. If I say I'm decarbonizing and offering to the private sector to invest in low emission manufacturing, hard to abate, or I'm offering the private sector to help me achieve my water security, I cannot flip-flop between, yes, it's open to private sector, no, it's not open to private sector, because that will disincentivize local, regional, and international investors. So stability and consistency of the strategy throughout political cycles, which is a challenge everywhere, but particularly in developing markets. The second one is many of the sectors of an economy will not earn hard currency, except those oriented to export of goods and services or tourism, for instance. So we need the international investors and regional investors will need access to affordable local currency financing solutions. That's the second big area where IFC has now achieved 10% of its lending is happening in local currency through a variety of mechanisms, but we need to do a lot more, because otherwise that means international investors, including ourselves, will not be helpful as we add on foreign exchange risk to borrowers that can't manage it. And the third one is about risk sharing. And that's why World Bank Group, we are establishing this one-stop shop in MEGA as a back office for all the guarantee and risk sharing instruments of the World Bank Group. And then IFC would be the one interacting with the private sector to acquire those risk sharing tools. And IBRD IDA would do it for the governments.